To be honest, I thought this was the most enjoyable episode of Invincible's second half of Season 2. There was everything in it, and it felt like the show's central plot was finally coming to a head. Whether it's Donald discovering the truth about his personality quirks, the breakup of Amber and Mark's relationship, the reappearance of Angstrom Levy, Mark's growing resemblance to his father, or the looming menace of Viltrumite. Without further ado, let's dissect and understand Invincible Season 2 Episode 7, because it was jam-packed with entertaining and informative content. This video contains spoilers, just so you are aware. Angstrom is how Levy looks, to be honest. I was hoping for a bigger role for Levy this season, so I'm a little let down. The only other time we've seen him was in the pilot, and that was also the case this episode. Brief cameos after the credits roll or at the very end. While he was holding Debbie and Oliver captive, he called Mark on Debbie's phone to tell him he was returning home, as shown in Episode 7. Here we have an excerpt from a comic book that depicts Mark and Levy engaged in a battle while simultaneously traversing other dimensions. However, their narrative will continue beyond this. The several Mark Graysons we met in the first episode of Season 2 will likely return for this minor conflict, which is part of the Invincible War's training for One Arm. However, I'm going to assume that this storyline will continue into Season 3 of the program and will not be concluded in next week's season finale. On the other hand, I'm relieved about it since Angstrom Levy is someone I enjoy, and we haven't spent much time with him. Like his dad, Mark is becoming more like his dad. One of my favorite parts of this week's program was definitely all the drama around Amber and Mark's relationship. Starting with the awkwardness between the two after the unpleasant nature of the previous episode, the entire show revolved around it. Mark resisted becoming his father for the first half of the season. It was the thing he appeared to fear the most, knowing what his father become. Nevertheless, as the story progresses, we observe him gradually adopting his father's traits, particularly in regards to relationships and the void that they frequently create. During an exchange between Mark and his college's dean, the latter advised him to make a choice about his future specifically, whether or not to continue his studies. The decision he had to make with Amber and the job he was doing with Cecil were allegorical for the school discussion they were having at the time. For this particular situation, he decided that Amber would be the one to choose. After talking to his mum and seeing the pain she endured whenever Nolan disappeared for several weeks, he made this decision. "Is it a relationship if you're never with the other person?" she asked. If Mark could have seen Amber's genuine emotions, he would have spared her the pain her mother endured. As a result, he utterly captivated her. At this point, though, Anissa, a Viltrumite assigned to check up on Mark's mission, appeared, and she threatened to murder Amber unless he accompanied her. Anissa was about to strangle Amber to death as her hands encircled her neck, something that Amber felt deeply. When Mark got back from being with Anissa, a lot of tremendous things happened. The thought that she might have just lost her life due to her association with Mark had Amber sitting there in tears, nearly paralyzed with fear. It dawned on her as well that nothing was ever going to change. Considering that, similar to Nolan, Mark would perpetually be required to depart for extended durations and abandon her. The piano tune that played in the background of this scene was incredibly well composed. It was both sorrowful and chaotic, and it sounded gorgeous and romantic. Even though I knew Mark and Amber were going to end their relationship at some point, I found the scenario to be really moving. The pain of their shared loss was palpable to me. They truly desire to be together, but they have come to terms with the fact that they cannot risk their lives by remaining in a relationship. As a result, they have decided to separate ways. Danger from Viltrumite with Anissa's introduction in this episode, we also noticed a few subtle changes to the scenario. Anissa walked in on Mark and Amber having supper together during the show. On the other hand, in the comics, she does in fact threaten to murder Mark's mother unless he spoke up to her, and she interrupts Mark and Debbie. Having it be Amber gave the split more weight in the show's background. According to what Anissa said, the Viltrumites had grand plans for Earth. Under their control, the planet would transform into a utopia, and death would be practically eradicated since the Viltrumites would make sure that every person had a better life. There's a big catch, though. They'd be subject to a more advanced species that didn't see death as an obstacle. Actually, if there was any opposition, they would murder anybody in their path. She was concerned that Mark might not be acting in accordance with Craig's instructions from the first part of Season 2, but he clearly wasn't. It seemed like this scene was added to highlight Anissa's strength in comparison to Mark, as the conversation escalated to a point where a cruise ship needed to be saved from a monster. There was an only 18% chance that Mark might prevail over her, and she dispatched the monster with ease, unlike Mark, who had to fight it for multiple rounds. When she indicated that Mark required his agreement to begin the Viltrumite rule on Earth and get everyone in queue for it, we saw that he was loyal not only to himself but also to the people of Earth. His refusal to accept it, however, demonstrated his willingness to die for his beliefs. Despite his superhuman identity, he places a much higher value on the human half of his personality and the aspects of himself that he most closely identifies with. Anissa left him alive after bringing him dangerously close to death. We learned that she had promised another agent would be there to check that he had begun the task. It will be intriguing to observe what transpires there, as Mark will certainly not support the Viltrumites. After the credits rolled, we learned that she and Craig had returned to space, where they had attacked Alan upon his return flight. But Alan was much stronger now, and her strikes weren't as devastating as they had been. Alan even succeeded in making her bleed, an accomplishment that Mark failed to accomplish throughout their confrontation. This proved that once Thetis shut off the machine, Alan's strength actually increased. But she grabbed hold of him after kicking him and began to take him to jail. But it appeared that Alan lied about his injuries in order to get sent to prison. Omni-Man was being kept in the prison he knew about. In my opinion, this is the point where the escape will occur. The breakout attempt by Alan and Omni-Man in the comic book, so I'm assuming it will happen during next week's finale. Donald's perception and goal, I couldn't stop thinking about Donald and whether he would betray Cecil throughout this second half of the season. In earlier episodes leading up to this one, he had a lot of opportunities to shake his fist, and I genuinely thought he would eventually turn on him. On the other hand, Cecil revealed to Donald the truth about his artificial heritage when he expressed his desire to leave in this episode. Because his memories were being erased, Donald thought he wasn't feeling well. Having his memories wiped was always Donald's choice, not Cecil's, it turned out. His 98% android composition made sense when we learned that he had been both murdered and reassembled 39 times. However, his connection story with Rick was the driving force for this introspection and his realization that he shouldn't feel any less human. Rick was overwhelmed by nightmares about Dar Sinclair and his incessant dissection and reconstruction. He was so distressed by them that he was ready to take his own life. It wasn't about a person's physical makeup that mattered when Donald showed up, but rather the impact they had on those around them and the emotions they evoked. And that was the thing that prevented Rick from leaping to his death and returning to safety. Thus, that section of the story was intertwined with Donald's self-discovery and realization, which was crucial to Rick's growth. The advancement of Debbie, my main takeaway from the second half of the season, is how much Debbie's character has developed compared to the first half. She seems to spend the first 4 episodes moping over her past and trapped in her own thoughts. Episode 4's escalating tensions suggested she was about to jump off the bridge, adding to our impression that her marriage was a fraud and that she felt meaningless in life. However, keep in mind that she chose not to.